And we're back once again to help you guys with overwintering your rooted cuttings. So we've talked about just planting the cuttings out in your landscape and getting them growing on where you want them to eventually end up. We've talked about healing them in case you have them in pots or something and you just want to pull them up next spring and make it real easy on yourself. So both of those methods use the ground temperature to help regulate temperature so that when the ambient air starts dropping real fast, the ground temperature stays relatively the same and doesn't drop so quickly, and those roots have a chance to harden off before they freeze. This next method I show you is going to use the exact same principles. It all has to do with keeping the roots from freezing too fast in the winter time or in the fall time when things are starting to get colder. This method will work great if you have flats of rooted cuttings or you have just a lot of them in a tote or just too many rooted cuttings to either one, pot them all up and heal them in, or two, plant them all out on your landscape. So you can just take the whole flat or the whole tote or whatever you have and just set them down and forget about it. Let's go take a look at what we've got. All right guys, so we're out here actually in my orchard and where I've got my blueberries and strawberries and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to do this in soil because I'm not doing this permanently here. I really don't need to. I've got a hoop house set up. But if you live in an extremely cold environment, if I lived in Canada somewhere and it was getting down to -20, this is the exact method that I would use to overwinter my rooted cuttings. And the truth is, this method will probably be okay to use for varieties that aren't necessarily cold hardy for your area. It's a really, really good method to use. So once you got your hole dug and you've got it framed out with boards and you're all set and ready to go, this is where this works out perfectly with rooted cuttings in some type of a little tote, or you know, one of these guys here where you've got them all lined out. You can just take this whole thing and just set it right down in there, and it's that easy. That way you don't have to plant every individual cutting, or you don't have to heal them all in. You can just set them right down in there and then cover over this thing. So once you get all these cuttings set down in this little area, you're gonna wanna cover it over because you want that ground warmth to float up, hit the cover, and keep the area down in here at a more stable temperature. Now, that being said, this area is gonna freeze hard as a rock no matter what you do. But what we're after is the regulation of the temperature fluctuation. We know it's gonna freeze in there, but we don't want it freezing too hard if you have sudden cold frost. You want these things to just slowly acclimate to winter and harden off so they're able to withstand those cold temperatures. And you don't want that to happen suddenly because that's what will kill your cuttings. But this is just a beautiful setup, and as long as you've dug down and buried this guy, you've got it down below the soil level, you're going to be just fine with your cuttings being in here. Now, what I would do once you set them in here is, like I said, definitely cover them over, but you more than likely want to cover them with something that's not clear. And now this depends on where you live. If you live in an area like Canada or Alaska where the temperatures are -20 and the sun is out on the horizon in the wintertime and not hitting anything clear plastic here, then you'll probably be okay with glass or clear plastic because this won't heat up enough in here. But if you use glass or clear plastic in an area like Southern Oregon or even in Washington, maybe it might heat up too much and those cuttings will break dormancy and start growing right in the middle of winter, and you don't want that. So it's probably best, unless you live in a real cold climate, to just cover them with some black plastic or something that the light can't get through, or something that not as much light can get through. If you have like a shade cloth and maybe a little light can get through but not a lot, that would be ideal. And then some nurseries actually come back over, they'll actually have some sort of a, you know, maybe a 2x4 running from here to the other side, and then you can actually, if it's strong enough, you can pile more wood chips or something over top of it so it can help regulate that temperature a little better. And a lot of nurseries will do that with plastic. They'll cover over all their potted plants with plastic. They lay them on their side and then cover them over so that in the winter time the ground regulates the temperature underneath the plastic and those potted plants do well through the winter. And that's only really necessary in very, very cold regions. Another thing you guys can do is to actually build a little bit of a cold tunnel over this. If you have some plastic pipe, PVC or small metal conduit, you can bend little shallow hoops over top of this and put plastic over it, and that will help regulate the temperature and keep it from getting too cold too fast in there. It'd essentially be like a hoop house, and you'll get the same effect, but being down into the soil will help keep it a little bit warmer for a little bit longer. So what I just showed you is a great method for overwintering trays of rooted cuttings. If you live in a really, really cold area, it'll work out great for you. In fact, some nurseries in really cold areas take their big potted plants, their 1 gallon, their 2 gallon, their 3 gallon, even their 5 gallon potted plants and trees, and they'll lay them down in blocks over the winter, and they just lay them right next to each other, one on top of another, and just lay them down flat, and they probably stick up a foot, foot and a half tall, and then they cover that whole block with plastic and weigh it down around the edges, and just that is enough to help the ground temp come up, hit the plastic, and just slowly regulate the temperature within that plastic. It's not going to keep them from freezing. It's just going to regulate that temperature a little better and prevent the harsh fluctuations. So with all of the videos that we've got in this little series, that is what I want to impress upon you guys the most. And it's that these cuttings, these plants are gonna freeze hard as a rock. And like I've said 100 times before, as long as you choose varieties of plants that are cold hardy and can survive in your area, those cuttings are way hardier than you think they are, and they'll do way better than you think. If you just do a little bit of leg work, maybe healing them in or planting them out in your garden or digging a little pit, they'll do just fine. And if you watch that video, I'll put the link up in the corner, that I did last year. I just threw the tray of cuttings out in the freezing cold, ice, snow, everything else, and they lived. But these videos are to help you come up with alternate methods or a little bit more protection if you need through the winter. But that's what I want to impress upon you the most. These things are going to freeze. That's not what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent fast temperature fluctuations. This hoop house that I have behind me, and this is not a greenhouse. This is a hoop house or a cold frame. This is not a greenhouse. These plants freeze hard as a rock through the winter, but the plastic regulates the temperature. Would this work in Alaska or Canada? Maybe not, because it gets so cold. They get permafrost there that goes down feet in the ground, but it works in my climate. If you live in the Northeast or you live in a colder climate, you may need to dig one of those pits. You may need to heal things in and use a cold frame. You've got to determine that based on your climate. Now I want to show you real quick another little setup that I've got going on just to help you that much more. This is another little propagation frame that I've got going on inside of my big cold frame. And there's the doors. Right next to the door, the cold air can come in, but this plastic regulates the temp so well that I don't have to worry about anything. And these cuttings are inside of another frame with a lid on. Now, I've got this thing propped up because they've already rooted and I don't need the humidity quite so much in there anymore, but these guys rooted through the summer. I'm going to leave them all right there in their place, and they're well protected. They're going to freeze hard as a rock come this winter, but they're going to bounce back this spring and grow fantastic. So that about does it for now, and I hope this little series helps you guys a lot when it comes to overwintering your cuttings. As I come up with more ideas or things that maybe I didn't add to the video that I think about later, I'll put another video out and try to get you guys more ideas. But that's the crux of this system, is just trying to regulate temperatures so that your cuttings don't freeze so fast. Oh, one more thing. I'm glad you're still watching. If you're not, well, I'm sorry, but I'm glad you guys are still watching. And this is really important. When you guys are using these types of methods, when you're planting them out in your landscape, you want to get it done as soon as possible so the roots get a chance to get into the soil before the freezes come. When you're healing them in, you can do that anytime. You can take the pots and put them in the soil, but sooner is better than later because you want to protect them from freezing really hard real fast. But if you're going to use that method where you're digging out a pit, you want to leave the plants outside of that pit long enough to harden off a little bit. You don't want to go too far into the fall, but you want to let them go through their natural cycle to where the plants are actually getting down into some cold temperatures. Maybe even let it freeze for one night, and just let those plants slowly harden off. You don't want to take them from temperatures where you know, you're in the 60s or the 50s or something like that, and then throw them in the pit and then cover them. They won't be very hardy down in there. So I like to let all of my plants harden off before I'm gonna use that method and get them down into that pit, because once they're hardened off and then you get them down into that pit, then they're gonna be much hardier down there. If you try to put them down there too soon and all of a sudden you do get a real hard freeze, they're not gonna do as well. Now, of course, you don't want to wait too long, so if you're a little bit worried about temperatures and you're thinking you could get a hard, fast freeze one night, you definitely want to get them down into that soil, down into that pit, down somewhere safe and protected. But let them sit outside for a longer period into the fall first. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to follow along. Have an awesome week, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.